Thank you for returning as we continue on this book, Masturbation, Shattered Expectations for Sexual Gratification. In the next two chapters, we will attempt to provide an apologetic response to the medical, psychological, and religious communities and their philosophies that endorse and condone masturbation. We'll be taking a look at this idea of natural apologetics. First of all, apologetics involves the mind which attempts to show reason why something is true or false. It is an activity that defends against criticism and distortion by providing evidence for credibility. Natural apologetics is a means of applying logical conclusions to premises held by others. It involves careful reflection of what someone states as facts and the reasonableness of those statements. We will consider the previous research from the last lesson and attempt to provide a summarization of their statements and an apologetic approach to those statements. First of all, masturbation is acceptable because it relieves sexual tension. The basis for this deduction is that the majority of medical and psychological journals cite this is an acceptable reason for masturbation. But is there support for such a conclusion? One.com survey showed the frequency of masturbation of those between the ages of 11 and 35. Those surveyed masturbated an average of 11 times per week. After age 35, the frequency decreased to 5 times per week. The word relieve means to ease, to lighten, or to reduce. Relieve implies the reduction of misery and discomfort in order to make something bearable. People reading the endorsement by these communities deceive themselves into thinking that masturbation brings relief. This deception is similar to the substance abuser who says that he only needs one drink. One drink may produce the euphoria desired, but the intensity of the euphoria increases and one drink no longer meets the craving. Another drink is added. Consider this to be a reason for the increased frequency of masturbation by those who participate. There are no harmful effects on the body. Most of those writing about masturbation poke fun at the early attempts to prove that masturbation was harmful to the person. Early writers cited baldness, blindness, and hairy palms. As early as 1758, a Swiss physician named Tissot published a treatise claiming that masturbation was the principal cause of mental illness. In 1834, Dr. Sylvester Graham wrote that the loss of semen during sex was injurious to health and that masturbation was especially pernicious. To reduce sexual cravings, Graham advised mild foods. The graham cracker was invented. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg created cornflakes to curtail children's inclination towards masturbation. From our vantage point, we see the human folly of such thought processes. We can tentatively agree that to this point of the discussion, there is no scientific proof that masturbation is harmful. But that raises the question of the nature of man. Is man to be considered only material and sexual? Evolutionists promote the survival of the fittest and the evolving chain of higher development. From a one-cell being, man is the pinnacle of the evolutionary chain. Therefore, man is more than a mere body, but a rational and volitional creature. Man can reason, decide, and feel. Although there are no proven harmful side effects from masturbation on the body, what about the mind and the emotions? Physiologically, there seems to be no harm in masturbation, though most psychology textbook writers admit that associated guilt and shame afflict millions, especially during adolescence. Guilt and shame are often explained away by strict and legalistic religious upbringing. However, this would account for a small percentage of fanatics. What can be proposed for the majority who experience guilt and shame for masturbating? The answer is conscience, that innate presence that determines what is morally right and wrong, according to Romans 2:15. Though there are no physiological effects, the medical and psychological and religious communities explain away the effects on the person's mind and emotions. Their explanations are biased and unfounded. There are no harmful effects upon others. We read that masturbation is the safest form of sex. There is no transmission of bodily fluids to cause disease. Because it is a solitary activity, masturbation is harmless to others. Medical and physiological literature upholds the legitimacy of savoring the sexual fantasies through masturbation. When someone cannot find sexual fulfillment with another, masturbation is a viable, harmless alternative. Because man is the sum total of mind, emotions, and will, is it really possible to fantasize about another while masturbating and there be no harmful effects towards that person? Doesn't what you think have a direct link on how you behave? What if you fantasize about this person and continue to experience rejection? Do you think that the rejection will compound the thinking and intensity, the actions of the forbidden and unattainable? Fantasy is a desire to have something I crave and more than likely cannot have, or if I could attain, may be disappointed because fantasies are always incredibly more than reality. This is known as lust. Lust is quenchless. Its appetite is never satisfied. It always demands more, according to James 4:1 through 3. When we lust, we thirst desperately for something that looks like what we want. We don't realize, however, that is precisely the opposite of what we really need. In fact, it can kill us. Masturbation hurts other people because the person who masturbates withdraws, isolating himself. He lies and deceives to avoid discovery. He is fearful, and what was once a close relationship and open communication are now drastically affected. Masturbation hurts other people. Masturbation is better than immoral alternatives. Many believe that it is better to masturbate than live with excessive obsession with sex, and it is better to masturbate than risk falling into more serious sexual immorality involving another person. The other serious sexual forms of immorality would be adultery, fornication, bestiality, rape, incest, and homosexuality. The problem with this line of reasoning rests on the concept of quantifying. Those who argue this way are attempting to quantify one action as less significant, therefore acceptable, in contrast to others deemed unacceptable. By what standard would one conclude the degrees of wrongness? Would that standard be universally acceptable? For example, there is a difference in fines between a speeding ticket and a meter violation. There is even a difference in fines among speeding ticket violations based on the number of miles per hour over the limit. Everyone would agree, and this would be nearly universally recognized. However, there is still a level of wrongness for both the speeder and the parker, and for the two speeders. One cannot argue leniency based on circumstances. Therefore, the lesser of two wrongs is still wrong. The color gray is white color with a drop of black. So it is with masturbation. Masturbation is the drop of black to moral purity. If the majority of the people masturbate, it cannot be wrong. What is it that makes the majority seem right? The belief that the majority is right stems from subjective surveys of human opinions on scientific statistical information and summations and generalizations by the medical and psychological communities. James Dobson falls into this trap. He writes, quote, between 95 and 98% of all boys engaged in this practice, referring to masturbation, and the rest have been known to lie. It is as close to being a universal behavior as is likely to occur, end quote. His conclusion? My advice, he says, is to say nothing after puberty has occurred. You will only cause embarrassment and discomfort. The flaw with this logic is likened to the nursery school game of follow the leader. It stems from a blind, accepting belief in the statements and conclusions of men esteemed without scrutiny. Examine Matthew 15:14. It is trust in experts without critical assessment. People may be sincerely passionate and believable, and sincerely wrong. Psalm 118, verse 9, Psalm 146, verse 3. There's no difference in enjoying the pleasures of masturbation and enjoying the pleasures of eating a chocolate bar. Someone argues, when someone eats his favorite food, he is enjoying the pleasure of the feel and the taste of the food. Is it sinful to enjoy eating a chocolate bar? No. It only becomes a sin if the activity and the pleasure of eating become something which crowds out God, becoming an end to itself rather than being seen as a blessing from a loving God. When a person masturbates, his body will respond to the pleasurable physical stimulation that is being given. The act becomes an experience of blessing from the Lord. Now, how do you handle this type of reasoning? The problem is the right of pleasure. The argument presents that pleasures of masturbation is some God-given right. The pleasure is acceptable as long as we don't cross a line that is defined by the participant in a subjective mental and emotional state. This understanding of pleasure feeds the flesh and results in self-gratification. If pleasure is the determining factor in life, why would anyone go to work? Live within a budget, obey the speed limits, work on conflict or repair relationships. Our society and its mores demand obedience to a code. You get a traffic ticket when you speed because you disobeyed a posted speed limit sign. Your car is repossessed because you violated the contractual agreement for payment. You lose your job because you failed to show up for work. Some citizens may be relativistic at heart, but they live in a structured society. The issue is not pleasure, but obedience. Obedience feeds the spirit that results in glorifying God, not self. Masturbation is natural because it is part of the human development patterns. This argument comes from Freud's model of human sexuality. Because a baby will tend to explore his body, discovering his fingers and toes, it is logical to explore his sensuality in a similar way. If a baby does this, he will experience an instinctual sexual pleasure. This is part of his human growth and development. Other writers indicate that it is normal for such practices to continue into adolescence and adulthood. If this logic is true, that a baby who explores his body and discovers the pleasure of instinctual sexual pleasure, and it continues through adolescence into adulthood, one could argue that breast, breastfeeding should continue to age 12 or 26 or 42. Why not continue self discovery of the world around me, as babies do, by putting things in my mouth? Your response is one of credulous sneering. No grown person would do that. And why not, I might ask? Because you would reply, they have grown up and have acquired knowledge about such things. Precisely, I would comment, and the same reasoning holds for other areas of development. Can it not be equally applied to masturbation rather than suggesting it's normal to continue throughout adulthood and even encouraging it? Why does this pattern linger on while the majority of other development patterns do not? Surveys validate masturbation as an acceptable, harmless practice. Much of the encouragement to masturbate is derived from surveys. These surveys indicate the frequency of masturbation per week by gender and by age group, as well as the percentage of males and females participating. We live in a society where numbers project acceptability or feasibility. We return to the majority syndrome. First, these surveys are not scientific. Second, the data gathered is subjective. It is the opinion or experience of an individual. Third, the conclusion drawn by the populace endorsing a certain practice as harmless is seriously flawed. For example, legalizing marijuana would be well received by the majority. It wouldn't hurt anyone. It is harmless. We know that reasoning is unsound. Drug rehabilitation counselors and law enforcement agencies know that legalizing marijuana would lead to the use of other hard drugs and influence violent crimes. Surveys are not reliable. They are only indicators. Remember the headlines of an election long ago? Dewey wins. History records Truman holding up the headline with a big smile. And then finally, some have no control over the urges and impulses of masturbation. That is the way they are made. We are told in literature that masturbation is something that people do who cannot have a normal relationship with another. We read that those who become extreme are not responsible. They have no control over their impulses or urges. They do not have a sexual problem, but a psychopathological problem. Their thinking is obsessed with stimulus that result in masturbation, but they can't control this. In Steve Gallagher's book, At the Altar of Sexual Idolatry, he writes that sexual sins are hidden. The person involved with sexual sins takes great efforts to hide their participation because of the fear of discovery, hurting others, losing a job, wife, or children. It is not like someone addicted to substance abuse. Sooner or later, the problem manifests itself through broken health, job loss, violence, or even financial ruin. But sexual sins are controllable by the participant. How do we know this? The person involved may be a bank president, television preacher, senator, grandparent, son, daughter, and you might never know or suspect. It is not a matter of being out of control, but choosing to be out of control. It is a matter of a person abandoning passions to defective reasoning. In almost every other area of life, this person can control passions when driving a car, or another cuts him off, or speaking to an unbearably cruel employer, or a host of other situations. Abandoning passions to defective reasoning. Next time we get together, we will talk about biblical apologetics. How would the Bible answer each of these things that we have looked at? I thank you for tuning in and staying with us. I trust that you will come back and complete this studies with us.